Jay Gasman, host of The Wheelhouse on ESPN down in Houston. Jake, thanks for the time this morning. Great to have you with us, and a happy Easter weekend to you and yours. Let me ask you now. These guys brought this up. The Lovie Smith deal, going for two, going for the win. What are your thoughts on that thing? I don't have a problem with that. Maybe you do.
Look, I have no problem with what Lovie Smith did trying to win the game. The man knew he was getting fired. What does he care if the Texans end up with the first overall pick? The biggest issue I've had with that, and I've been hammering the Texans for months on our radio show down here, is why the heck did you allow Brandon Cooks to play in this game? Why did you allow Davis Mills to start this game? You look at what the Bears did. They're playing Nathan Peterman at the end of the year. They're shutting down Justin Fields. And it was obvious they did everything in their power within the rules to go out there and lose to get the number one pick. You can't ask players to lose on purpose. You can't ask coaches who aren't going to be back to lose on purpose. But Cal McNair, the owner of the Texans, and Nick Caserio, the general manager of the team, should have manipulated the roster in a way that set the Texans up to lose that last game, because now they're sitting here, and if they love Bryce Young, well, guess what? There's a chance you might not get the guy, and you're not getting the quarterback you wanted all along. So the biggest issue, just mentioning some of the players, everyone knew Brandon Cooks wanted out. He requested a trade in the middle of the year. He quit on the team. They took away his captaincy in the middle of the season over what happened in the locker room. So the fact that he was even out there, Tom, the last game of the season, is absolutely absurd, and it obviously backfired against the Texans.
All right, now, look, I've known Lovie Smith a long time. I think he's a good man. Everybody will make a decision on whether or not he's a good head coach or not. Move on. Okay, and that's what the organization has done. It seems to me here, you tell me you're down there, I'm not. You bring in a guy like DeMeco Ryans, okay, who there isn't a whole lot of no-nonsense BS stuff going on around there, and the way he played going back to his great days as a Texan, I think he's still the all-time leading tackler in Texans history, if I'm not mistaken. Talk about that move in and of itself of bringing in DeMeco Ryans as a head coach.
Well, that move it really brought this fan base together in a positive way for the first time in years. You look at the Texans the last couple of years, they've been the worst team in the NFL. The Deshaun Watson situation destroyed this franchise, where you had a franchise quarterback and then you end up having to trade him after he sits out for a year because you couldn't trade him because of an ongoing legal situation. So the Lovie Smith hire was the first hire, or not the Lovie Smith hire, excuse me, the firing of Lovie Smith and then subsequently hiring DeMeco Ryans was the first move the Texans have made that was universally praised by this fan base. They loved the guy as a player. He was obviously one of the top candidates. All five of the teams with openings in the NFL either requested or spoke with DeMeco Ryans. So the fact that he wanted to come home, he wanted to come back to Houston, was a big deal down here in Houston.
Let's talk about, we ask the questions all the time. Where you been? Where are you now? Where are you going? Okay, we know where they've been. They don't have Lovie Smith anymore. They now have a new head coach. They now have a whole kind of good vibe about the franchise, as you just said, for the first time in a while. Before we get to the draft, what is the state of this team on the field right now and the moves that have been made up until this point in time, not only with players we know about Ryans, but as far as strictly, what kind of team right now would you say the Houston Texans, are they better than they were at the end of last year?
Yeah, they're definitely better, but, I would caution Texans fans, if you're expecting, a Jaguars-like turnaround or, a Giants-like turnaround with Brian Dable coming in year one and going to the playoffs, I don't find that to be realistic with a rookie quarterback, likely the pick at number 2, but they are certainly a better team. They're going to be better coached with DeMeco Ryans. I mean, the players and the coaching staff were not on the same page under Lovie Smith, and they were actually worse this past year under Lovie than they were under David Culley, who won 4 games during his first and only year as the Texans head coach. So they've added some talent. Dalton Schultz was a nice pickup. Jimmy Ward was a nice signing. To talk about 2 of their marquee free agent moves. They traded for Shaq Mason to help solidify that offensive line away from the Bucs. So they should be better, but this is still a bottom 5 roster, maybe a bottom 3 roster in the NFL that's going to have a rookie quarterback going through growing pains with a first-time head coach and a first-time play caller. That's the OC. So this is still a rebuilding team, but there's a lot more hope for this fan base now because of DeMeco, because of the fact you have 2 first-round picks this year. You got 2 first-round picks next year. So you look at this Texans team, and if Nick Caserio is good at his job, this should turn around quick with the amount of resources they have.
We don't follow the Texans much up here in Cincinnati. You play a team during the year, they're in, they're out, done. You don't look at them the rest of the year. if there is a strength of this team, you mentioned about the roster, bottom 5, maybe bottom 3. If there is a strength to the roster right now, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would probably say their running game could be a strength. Dameon Pierce was a 4th-round pick a season ago, and he was well on his way to going over 1,000 yards if they didn't kind of shut him down towards the end of the year. He even said that he probably could have played through the injury he was dealing with. It was just to kind of protect him in a lost season. You add Dameon Pierce, they signed Devin Singletary, so that's a decent kind of 1-2 punch. There's a chance maybe they could draft someone once again with one of their 11 picks. So I would say the running back room is probably a strength for the team. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, obviously the tackle position for the Texans is rock solid. So if you're bringing in Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud or Levis, Richardson, name your quarterback, you have Laramie Tunsil, who's an all-pro on the left side, who they locked up for another 3 years. And then, you look at the right side, and Titus Howard is a draft pick from a couple of years ago that's really blossomed into a solid starting right tackle. So they have pretty good tackles, and they have a pretty good running back room, which is not a terrible place to start for a rookie quarterback.
Well, not at all, especially when you're talking about the offensive line, because Lord knows here in Cincinnati, I mean, Burrow's been killed by and large, and they've addressed the offensive line. It didn't work out. We'll see how it plays out now with Orlando Brown coming in. But, all right, let's get to the 3 of the first 33 picks in the draft, right? You got the second pick behind Carolina, the draft pick getting in the Deshaun Watson deal from Cleveland with number 12, and then the second pick in the second round. Maybe it changes, Jake, by the hour. How do you think the top 2 play out?
If I had to decide right now, I'd say Bryce Young is probably going number 1. That just kind of is the feeling right now. The betting odds started to shift, I think, in reaction to some of the comments maybe Chris Mortensen said on ESPN the other day that he's hearing it's going to be Bryce Young going 1. And when Mort usually says something, he's usually right. So I think that had maybe a lot to do with it. I think Young goes 1, and I think most Texans fans would prefer C.J. Stroud at 2. But I want to caution all football fans out there. Nick Caserio doesn't always do what you think he's going to do it. Case being a year ago, he chose Derek Stingley Jr. over Sauce Gardner, right, who went to the Jets with that 4th pick right after. So I've heard from people I trust that they really like Will Levis. Is that enough to take him 2nd overall? I guess we're going to find out. But, if I had to make a pick right now, I'd say C.J. Stroud, but don't rule out Will Levis going 2nd overall.
Well, I got to tell you, we're right in between those 2 programs right here in Cincinnati. I mean, geographically speaking, you're 90 minutes up the road from Ohio State. You're 90 minutes away, less than that really, down to Lexington, Kentucky. I tell you what, that's a better man than me if somebody thinks Will Levis is better than C.J. Stroud. I mean, a better man than me, brother, I got to tell you. To me, and look, I don't have a crystal ball, and maybe Levis turns out to be the next fill in the blank. I have no idea, on his way to the Hall of Fame, and Stroud stinks it up. I don't know. But, boy, I'd have a hard time finding somebody who would want to pick Levis ahead of C.J. Stroud.
Yeah, look, you're 100% right, and trust me, we are already getting the phone calls from Texans fans every day that are worried about this. One of my coworkers is Lance Zerline, who works for NFL.com and the NFL Network. He does our morning show on ESPN Houston, and last year he correctly mocked both Texans picks in the draft, and he just put out his most recent mock, and it was very curious. He had the Texans trading up to take Will Levis 7th overall because they're going with a defensive player at 2, because Lance apparently has heard that, hey, maybe the Texans aren't actually that high on C.J. Stroud. And that's kind of like the doomsday scenario for this fan base. This fan base wants Bryce Young, but they will certainly take Stroud. You start talking about Will Levis, and it's going to be a rough couple of months till we actually see what this guy looks like on the field.
All right, well, okay, so those are the top 2 guys. But in terms of what they want, what they need, we know they need a lot. They want a lot. But with that second round or the second pick in the first round you get from Cleveland with number 12, what are they looking at there?
It's a great question because they have a lot of holes, obviously. When you're one of the worst teams in the league, it's tough to really, take a position that's not a big need on this team. I would think they're definitely looking at a pass rusher in that spot at 12. I would think for sure a wide receiver could be in play. My favorite receiver in this class is actually one of Stroud's teammates in Jackson Smith and Jigba, the wide receiver, if he's there. So that's the guy I would take. If Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave say that guy's better than me, that's good enough for me to take 12th overall. So, I think receivers in play, edge rushers in play. Don't be surprised if Nick Caserio looks to trade back. Since he's been the GM, I think he's like in the top 3 of like most trades during the draft. So they traded back from 13 a year ago to 15 with the Eagles. It wouldn't shock me if they move back a couple spots and try and accumulate more picks and then go best player available.
I want to ask you, because you were around there when everything went down. The Bengals obviously play in the same division with the Cleveland Browns. Deshaun Watson had to sit out half the year last year after basically sitting out the entire year the year before that with everything that was going on off the field. For Bengal fans that are wondering what they might see because they probably didn't pay a lot of attention to him playing down in Houston when he was playing so well, do you think he will come back this coming year with a full offseason, all that kind of thing, and be the guy we saw that he was when he was playing in Houston?
You know, if you asked me this question like before Deshaun came back from suspension, I would have said 100%, no question about it. I just don't think, you know, he's completely forgotten how to play football. I mean, he looked lost out there when we were watching him play here in Houston. I don't think he's that bad, but I wonder, you know, how much mentally is he affected by everything that's transpired, you know, the last couple of years? Obviously, it's, you know, it's his own doing, but, you know, I just wonder about, you know, his mental makeup going through something like that and how that could potentially impact his play. I think he's going to be better, Tom. There's no way he's as bad as he looked last year, but I wonder if we're ever going to see the guy that was well on his way to being considered one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. He was in the top and rising quickly, I might add.
Yep.
But you're right. I mean, last year, and, you know, okay, you chalk it up, and I'm sure they're looking at it that way in Cleveland, chalk it up, all the time missed, et cetera, et cetera. We'll see this coming year. It could make for a fascinating story. The one thing that Houston fans, and boy, they love their football down in Texas. There's no doubt about it. Much like the NFC South, which we were just previewing, the AFC South does not have the juggernaut team. I mean, Tennessee has clearly taken steps back. I don't know what in the world's going on up in Indianapolis. I don't know what they're doing up there. But, you know, if you're going to get the quarterback, whichever one it is, at number 2, there at least has to be some optimism after some pretty dark days down there since the whole Watson thing went down.
Yeah, no question. There's definitely more optimism than there has been. But I'm telling you, if they take Will Levis second overall, that optimism is gone. This fan base will absolutely explode in anger if that happens. If they take Stroud, this fan base will be excited. Obviously, Bryce Young is the dream. So, and, you know, it's kind of funny too, Tom. The reason why I believe some Texans fans really want Bryce Young is because if you could look good with Bill O'Brien being your play caller, then you're going to be a pretty good quarterback in the NFL. That's how a lot of fans feel down here. So there's definitely more optimism. And, yeah, the division's not great. Tennessee could take a step back. I know Jacksonville, you know, they have Trevor Lawrence emerging. They won a playoff game, but, you know, they still only won 9 games last year. Let's see them do it year over year. And then, obviously, who knows what the Colts are doing? Are they going after Lamar? Are they going to take a quarterback at 4? Jim Irsay is kind of a wild card. We have no idea what Shane Steichen is as a head coach. So if they get it right with their picks, this could turn around quick. I mean, you all know this. Like, the NFL is not built for you to be bad as many years in a row as the Texans have been. So if they hit on their picks, this is a team, if D'Amico's the guy, the right head coach, they should be able to turn it around within a couple of years.
Well, Jake, we can't thank you enough for your time today and your expertise here today. Thanks so much, and have a great weekend.
Tom, appreciate you having me. I'm such a big fan of your work. I grew up in New York, and your call of the Jeter flip play is an iconic moment in my childhood. So this is the first time I've got a chance to talk to you about that. So keep up the great work, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you, Jake, for the kind words. I really appreciate it. Best of luck down there in Houston with the baseball season. You got one of our favorites down there in Dusty Baker. I mean, could there have been a better story than that guy last year finally winning the whole thing?
He's the best. He's a great guy, as you know, and we were all ecstatic for him down here.
Absolutely. All the best, Jake. Take care of yourself.
Thank you, Tom.
Now, that guy's on his game, too.